other way. Yeah.
Oh,
There we go.
it looked like we in a spotlight, highlight.
Get it.
Hello, my loves. Hello, my loves. Hello, my loves. And welcome. Welcome to another episode of Monique and Sidney's Open Relationship. What, Daddy?
The way you said relationship.
Because I mean it.
You mean it, baby.
I mean it, baby. How you doing?
Wonderful. How about you?
I'm absolutely wonderful, Daddy. You know what? When that light comes real close up on us like that, it looks like you in a lineup. Like it look,
That's what we are.
it look
That's
like,
what it is.
how you feeling about it, Daddy?
It's too bright.
It's all good.
Is it all
We're
good?
gonna rock and roll.
Well, welcome, y'all, my loves. Welcome, 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 welcome to the show today, baby. And it's getting ready to be a show.
Well, that's what we want.
That's what we want. We're talking about life and death, the reality and the fantasy. And the call-in number is 470-282-1802. 470-282-1802. Today we are talking about it, life and death, the reality and the fantasy.
Bam.
And how did we come up with that, Daddy?
Well, last week, if you good folks didn't know, Monique's mother passed away. And we had that discussion because there's always, when somebody passes away, there are feelings that are had. And we began to discuss those feelings, those realities, and those fantasies associated with life and death, and here we are.
You know, I think for me, and let me just start out saying this, okay?
Say,
This show for me is therapy, very therapeutic. And a lot of things that I share on this show, I would share on the couch if I were, in therapy. So I'm appreciative that for the ones that are in here listening to us and you share the videos and you talk about it, that y'all allow me to share because it lets me stay clear and open and honest and it keeps me grounded. Cause y'all can see a bitch, like y'all can see me, you know what I'm saying. This show lets you see a bitch, like they can't say cut, take it back. You can't edit it out. It's what it is. So we were talking about it because my father, he passed away. Paula, when did he pass? Has it been a couple years or a year?
about two, right? About 2 years, right?
Maybe about 2 years it's been. And and in my thoughts, when I was having my private thoughts, I didn't have any thoughts of missing him.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any thoughts of an overwhelming sorrow. I didn't have a connection. And for a minute to say that out loud that I didn't have a connection, it kind of shook me because I'm like, how do I say that out loud that I don't have a connection with this man? So I didn't feel that feeling.
Go ahead.
I didn't feel that feeling of, oh, my father died.
Or that need to fantasize about what it was. It was what it was. And if that's, again, how we came to the subject today. But then your mama.
Well, you know what though, Daddy? But I want to talk about my father. I want to stay on him.
Get it?
And when you say, I fucking love these therapy sessions. But because even sometimes in me and Robin's walks, and I have to say, I don't want to paint this picture that my parents were these bad people. But I want to paint the picture accurately for myself so that I'm not going to fantasy for myself about who I may have wanted them to be, how I may have wanted to be treated. I just got to paint it for what it was. And the one thing that my father said to me when I was a little girl, I was 7 years old, and it has stayed with me since I was 7 years old, and now I'm 50 years old. And I remember my grandmother was supposed to come pick me up, and some of y'all have heard this story before. My grandmother was supposed to come pick me up, right? And my father had a couple of them dog liquor cocktails, and my grandmother couldn't come. Now I was 7, right? So when my father comes upstairs in the room, I'm crying because I'm devastated because I'm not gonna go over Mimi's house. So my father said, "Hey, Nikki," and he looked at me and he said, "Let me tell you something. Don't nobody owe you shit. Anything you want, you gotta go get it." Now I'm 7. Okay, I'm 7, and I'm like, but at 7, that absorbed in.
And you went and you got on that bus and you caught that down to your
I'm not
grandmother's.
fucking with you.
Okay,
I'm
but you
not.
had to get it yourself now.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not.
Did you catch the bus?
I didn't catch no goddamn bus
Oh,
nowhere.
but wouldn't that have been just
'Cause I was
something?
getting ready to say, really? Because I was riding the bus at 7.
Paulette, I wasn't riding the bus at 7, okay? I didn't know how to catch no goddamn bus at 7. At 7 years old, Mimi was gonna come pick me up and take me to her house. Now y'all gotta understand, I'm gonna paint the whole story, okay?
But you just fucked up a good story though. That was a good ending now.
But Daddy, that wasn't true.
You right. I was just playing, baby.
But
My
that,
bad.
but that puts me in mind of Beverly Hills Cop when Eddie Murphy
Right.
told the story and then Taggart came back and told the truth.
Yeah.
He said, "You fucked up."
Yeah, come on,
You
man.
fucked it up. Okay. So, no, I didn't get on no bus and catch no bus. God damn it. But what I held on to was at 7 years old, didn't nobody owe me shit. Didn't nobody owe me nothing. And if I wanted to get it, I had to go get it. And that's the one lesson that my father taught me, which was a great lesson because I never ever let it go. But when I think about my father and I think about the nurturing, there was none. Now, I saw a man who had an amazing work ethic. He wasn't gonna miss a day of work. God damn it, baby, it could be 25 inches of snow outside, and nigga was going to Patuxent.
Cool.
He wasn't gonna miss it. But in reference to the nurturing of his family, it was something that I didn't receive. So when I think about him, my thoughts aren't those thoughts of fantasy where I want to paint him out to be what he wasn't for me. I can't paint him to be what he was for my brothers or my sister, but what he was for me. So when I think about my mother and my mother who just passed, I can't paint that picture either, as bad as I want to. Isn't there something?
I mean, but is it? It's all something. Not to get philosophical, but then here's the place to do it. It's almost like it is what it is. And the reason why we have these conversations is because you're not alone. And when you hear, was that Robin who produced the obituary? Who was that? It was Chris or Tom, you said. They gave you the obituary
Yes.
in reference to a family that felt a certain way about their mother.
Yes.
The way in which they spoke about their mother in death was the way in which you would hear somebody talk about somebody in life when they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Yes.
And it's one of those things, because people do grieve differently. You can't feel guilty for the way that you grieve. We're just kind of sharing the thought process of, this is the reason why you want to live your truest self, so that in death people don't have to fantasize about who you were. It can be what it is, and there's no shame in you feeling the way it actually was. The shame, in my humble opinion, comes in when you're trying to pretend something was a certain way when you know it wasn't.
And see, I think too, for me, when people say, "Oh, your mother passed," and I think for some people it's a different thing than your father, because it's your mother. And I know for me, I showed up for my mother in life, because somebody put, did you go to the funeral? I don't do funerals. I don't do them. But I showed up for my mother in life. And that's why I believe I don't have those feelings of guilt. I don't have those feelings of, I wish I would have, I know I could have. I feel like I did what I was supposed to do in life. So there's no reason for me to now show up in death, because who would I be showing up for?
And just to be specific, because I think when you say that you don't do funerals, it's not a blanket statement because it's almost what we're communicating, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you don't do them when you don't feel the need to do them. There's not an unseen obligation versus there situations that you've been in where you felt you needed to be there.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's one of those things where we say that in one breath, but there are people like my grandmother and my grandmother's friends back in the day would go to people's funerals that they didn't even know.
My grandma's still alive.
Okay, they go to funerals they didn't even know and be like, this lady, Miss Edna, she lived around on McCullum Avenue. Now she know I don't know her from McCullum Avenue. I ain't allowed to go to McCullum Avenue. Okay, I ain't old enough.
They could tell you where the body at.
Where the baddie at and everything. So it's almost like you got folks that are like that because it's intriguing to them because one day they know that they'll be there. And in our culture, folks used to save money all their life so they could be buried properly. And that was the end all the be all. So to speak this way in our culture specifically is not typically the accepted way to go because we look at it as an act of nobility when we talk highly about someone that wasn't necessarily deserving of the high praise in death based upon the way they lived in life.
And you know, when we start speaking about funerals, that goes into a whole nother place because somebody put in the room, oh, so you'll go to other people's funerals, but you won't go to your mother's funeral. I don't know where that came from, but let me be clear about something. I didn't go to my grandmother's funeral, and that was one of the sweetest people that I knew. But we had a conversation, and we had a conversation while both of us were living. And we both said we wasn't going to do funerals. That's not what we were going to do. And we were going to enjoy each other while we were alive. And we gave each other that our word in reference to that. I think that sometimes, for me, we show up in death because we want other people to see that we show up in death.
Right.
It's we showed up, you know, my father's memorial, and I didn't go to that.
Getting the picture.
But it made me chuckle when you see the people that were there because of who my father was. And for every last person that was there, except for my mother, had any of them passed away before my father would have said, babe, tell him I'm sorry. And that would have been that. But it would have been no, I'm going to go out of my way to attend or get it be inconvenienced. Not that that's a bad person, that's just who he was. So when you begin to see the fantasy of shit, and you begin to see people that show up in death. Now, my father's health was poor for a long time. And for all those people that showed up at that memorial, did any of them show up? So you start asking the questions, why do we show up in death? And it's to pay your respects, but who are you paying the respects to? Like who are you giving that to? If you never showed up in life, who are you giving those respects to?
I think you just hit it. That's what people are saying. They're saying that, funerals are for the living. Death is only for people who stayed behind to notice that you passed. So the individuals who are getting the oncoming spirit, because, again, you see a child. Before that child existed, it had to be somewhere, maybe not together, but the spirit of it, and then you see what we have there. So we assume that because they're leaving us, we call that death. That's the time that we give the tribute. But I think we're coming to a place and space where people are becoming more comfortable with calling things the way that they are.
Tasha says funerals are a celebration of a person's life. And I can understand why, we say that. But does it have to, do we have to celebrate in cost? I saw this thing.
Now that's different. But
Well,
you can
Daddy,
make
bring it
somebody.
back.
No,
Bring
no.
it
You
back.
can share that.
Because
But I'm
I
just
saw
saying that's different.
this thing one time on my little TV, and y'all know I call Facebook my little TV. And there was this brother who used to be a director of a funeral home. And he said, I have to share with my people the scam that goes on with the funeral homes. He said, my job is to get every dime of that insurance policy. Every dime of it. My job is to make sure when we walk away from one another, I have everything that was in that insurance policy because my job is to work on your emotions and let you know you gotta send them away good. You gotta send them away nice. Well, is that the fantasy? Because how did we deal with them in life? Did we deal with them nice in life? Did we go out of our way in life? Were we considerate of them in life? Because humbly, I feel like if we are good to one another in life, when that moment comes, well, you know how I feel. It's like, oh, don't put not a dime in the ground, not a cent. It's over. It's done.
Somebody asked how you wanted to go. Let them know.
I told my family, I said, if my husband is still here when I take my last breath, I am to go to the what is it, the crematory, immediately. It is to be over immediately. There is to be no, okay, well, next Tuesday, when Barbara and them get paid. Immediately. It is, if it happens on Sunday, goddamn it, and they open Sunday night, it's to happen Sunday night, and life keeps going Monday. Like it keeps going. Because we oftentimes, I think, we wallow in death. And when you put somebody in the ground, there are some people that die with them. And they will themselves to die. Because they can't feel like, oh, I can't go on, I can't function, I can't make it. So they will themselves to die. And then you have the extra pressure of now financially, we're in a different place because we put it in the ground. So now Earl is dead. I am mourning Earl's death, and now I ain't got no goddamn money. So now I'm resentful that Earl done died, and I'm resentful there's no goddamn money. And for all the people that showed up for Earl's funeral, who can I turn to when I need love?
Uh-oh. Right. And with that being said, everybody has a different experience. And that's why we're having the conversation because you got to do what's right for you because there's some people who feel like I got to do it this way. And there's some people that just like feel the same way that we may feel like it is what it is, but it's almost like think about what it is that you want to do. Don't just do it out of because somebody said or out of that's normally what do what feels best for you. Because if you find yourself showing up in an environment where you had a loving experience with this individual, because my grandmother, when she passed away, she said to me bluntly, she said, "You're gonna be fine, but watch all the other niggas." That's how she talked. She said, "Watch the other niggas," and by that she meant her children. And to see how broken up they were, she attributed that to how indifferent and how well our experiences were versus how they experienced her when she was alive. And when you've done, her philosophy was when you've done the best that you can possibly do for a person, you know that day is coming.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do no more. And if that person loves you like you love them, they're going to want you to have the most that you can have when they're gone and the best for you when they're gone like they did when you were here. So our thing is understanding that when we do what we do. You had an experience recently with in a conversation with a lady that was telling you about her mom.
You know, I'm gonna share that conversation in a second, but my niece just put something in the room and she said, Anika, we're gonna put some 4x4s together when that time comes and burn you off. Oh, that tickled me. But I had a conversation with this beautiful sister maybe last week, and we were speaking about our relationships inside of our families. And we were speaking about our mothers. And she said that in their community, her mother was stellar. Like in that community, she won Mother of the Year. She was the stellar mother of the church. Like everybody just really honored this woman. She said, but behind closed doors, my mother was a monster and an alcoholic. She said, and we got the wrath of that. So when she said her mother died, she said, I sent her away wonderful. She said, and they still talking about the way I put my mother away. But the conversation we were having leading up to that was the picture that the community believed your mother to be was not who your mother was, and that wasn't a relationship that you and your mother had, because it slipped up into being abusive. So how do you put her away nicely, and who did you put her away nicely for? Like, was that for you, or was that for the community so they could say, wow, she put her mom away nicely? Like, I can't judge it either way, but how do we feel some way about a person in reality, but then when they die, we want to paint another picture as to who people believe them to be, if that makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's part of the need for us not to complain, because in our culture, we've been raised, there's no use complaining because it's going to be what it is. Not understanding that you're not complaining, but you're having conversation about things that are taking place. And sometimes when you do a lot and you have people speaking well about a person, it conceals the secrets that are yours and that person, where they may not, in certain situations, there are a lot of people who are very deserving of the things that are being said, and those people should be, you send them home how you collectively think is the best way to send them home, with the utmost respect. And even those who may not have been the best when they were alive, there's a level of respect that you're paying them by not pretending that something was something when it really wasn't. Because if that was the case, then why wouldn't it have been more when that person was alive? Like, let it be what it is. And this is the fearful part that we, especially as people of color, because we've been in an environment socially where we had to look a certain way so we didn't look bad in front of others. So this is a large part of the reason why we have the conversations that people might think, but not have a place to have a conversation where you're not going to be judged either way you do it, but just give it some thought. Like, why are you doing what it is that you're doing?
Someone said it's the path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember my mother and I had a conversation years ago, and she said, when I die, I want flowers. I want a bunch of flowers everywhere. And I said, I won't send that. I won't do that if I'm still living. I said, but I'll give them to you while you're alive. Because when you're gone, it's like, are you going to smell them? Will you smell those roses when you're gone? So I think we get caught up in a lot of magical and mythical things when it comes to death. And when we don't deal with the reality of what the life was and we stay in the fantasy of death, I think that is why we continue to have dysfunction inside of our homes and our families, because we make things out to be fantasy and not reality. And we paint pictures sometimes where it's like, but that's not who they were. That's not what that was. So as long as we stay in this place, now we keep passing on this bullshit and nobody's really dealing with it. For me, my grandmother, my mother's mother, and this is only my perception of her, but she lived and died at a dining room table. That's all I ever saw her do as a little girl to a grown woman. I would go to their house. She would be sitting at the front of that table. She would be watching the stories. She would have a Coca-Cola or Pepsi.
Coke.
She would have a Coca-Cola.
And
She would have
cranberry
some
chocolate bar.
cranberry chocolate bar,
Cadbury.
Cadbury. She would have a crossword puzzles. That's who I knew her to be. I didn't know her to be any other way other than that at all. So when I saw my mother, when my mother's health got to a place where, you know, she couldn't get around as much, and I went to her house and I saw her sitting in that same position, that same way, with a Pepsi Cola, her cigarettes, and a crossword puzzle, and she was sitting at that table looking at that TV, and I said, wow, you're gonna go out of here just like your mother. Just like your mother. And she went out pretty much like her mother. But because we don't have those conversations out loud, and we just keep them in, we keep passing it on and passing it on, instead of saying, you don't see that there's something happening here? That generationally, this is how we're leaving? Generationally, this is how we're leaving. The last, 6, 7 people that's passed away in my family, all from poor health. Didn't nobody just have, we were surprised. Did anybody leave that we were surprised about? And when I look off y'all, you know I'm looking at my baby cousin
the last
Rodney.
6 people that died?
Junior, Billy, Donald, Grandma, my mother, my father, like all of them died in poor health. Like nobody left in where we say, wow, you know, they just had, something just happened. Like we all knew that they were gonna pass because their health was breaking down. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you're making sense. And with everything that she's saying, because this is the balance part between Monique and I. She's very adamant about what she's saying as if there's no gray. And it's very black and white. That's why you can appreciate her saying, yo, this is how she feels. Well, I guess I come into play is that I'll say something along the lines of, as you see that person choosing to live the way that they want to live, that's the way that they want to live. And it's not that they were bad, good, ugly, anything, but it's almost like the way that an individual decides that they want to give respect to someone is the way that they decided to give respect to them. But we as human beings, all we would ask and I would ask is, you think for yourself if that makes sense for you, whatever it is that you're going to be doing, because you have a right to make decisions for yourself and not allow the decisions that others have made to be your decisions just because that's what they think. Just because that's what they think. Whether it's we have an opinion, don't agree with us just because we're saying this is what you should do or don't do or whatever. Research it for yourself and see what feels best to you, because we just found that humbly, when we address things for what they were, how can you go wrong? For what they were and what they are. How can you go wrong because you're dealing with it accurately versus the proverbial whitewashing of something and making it seem like it was more than it wasn't, and or even worse, it was less than what it really was. Because sometimes we can minimalize the value of what someone brought to the table, which is just as bad, and not give them the respect that they deserve to have. But this all leads back to, even more important, that you do give the people the flowers while they're here, and not wait till they're gone to give them major tributes, because there's a level of conversation that you can't say once they're gone, you can't have. And I'll just say from my personal experiences with my grandmother, she was correct. And that when she passed away, you know, there's certain people, she was my person where if something happened to her, I didn't believe I could go on. And she was like, you're going to be fine. Now, the rest, no, but you're going to be just fine. And she was right, because we realized that I couldn't have said I love you more than I said to her. The good times that we had, they were in such abundance that I felt like it was definitively more than I could have ever asked for.
Mm.
So if you have that type of relationship, there's a level of overdoing it that you don't have to do because there's a quiet peace that you have, you know, inside of yourself to a degree where the shit is cosmic. Because we say that sometimes those people aren't really there. I don't know if they're there or not, but what I'll say is there were a coffin full of flowers on top of my grandmother's coffin as they were moving the coffin by the family on the front row. And out of all those flowers, one fell off and dropped right on my foot. So it made me feel like, you know, oh, grandma always setting something aside for me, like she always had. And one day I let the flower go because I had had it in plastic for a long time. And that was almost like the last thing that she would have given me. But then I had to let it go because I realized everything that she had given me, it was always with me. So
Mm.
it just depends upon how we look at these things. And the same way we try not to judge folks so harshly uh, in life, hopefully we can do that in death and vice versa.
And you know, again, when we say the reality of life and the fantasy of death, like, I don't know how many sisters or brothers, or, you know, I don't know how many of us share with our kids how we feel about our spouse. Like, I don't know if we share, you know, how we feel about, you know, if I'm in love, or I don't know those conversations. And the point I'm trying to make is, I had never ever heard my mother say anything good about my father. Not that I heard her say anything bad. I never heard her say anything good about my father till the day he died. And the day he died, she said, "Your father was a good, honest man." Mm. And all I could say was, mm-hmm, because I knew she had been with this man for almost 50 years. But it's like, well, who are you talking about at this point? Because I know him too. I know him too. And I'm not saying that he was dishonest, but in his honesty, we knew that he wasn't really interested in a family. In his honesty, and it doesn't make him a bad person, it's just what it was. But in his death, my mother wanted to paint a picture of this man, and it's like, but who are you talking about? Because now we're not playing fairly. And if we keep doing that, that poison keeps going on because we're not having the real conversations. Like, we're not saying what we really need to be saying to heal us.
Mm-hmm.
And that fantasy and death, that's what keeps us, in my humble opinion, that's what keeps us sick.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we all walking around living, but it's almost like we all got a secret. Because we know he wasn't shit, but ain't nobody gonna say he wasn't shit. We just gonna now, we don't want to disrespect the dead. Well, goddamn it, he wasn't respectable while he was living.
And somebody would say, was he not shit? Or did he just have his issues? It's almost like
I wasn't talking about my
no,
father.
I understand. I'm just saying somebody would say, your ass be going hard to the paint. And in actuality, it's like that person was not the most considerate. So I don't even understand all this consideration y'all seem to be giving this person because we know what it was. And that's part of sometimes we say things just straight up like, look, he wasn't shit. Okay, that nigga wasn't shit, ain't never been shit, and we're never gonna be shit. Okay.
And wherever he get where he going,
right,
he still ain't gonna be shit.
You know, when in actuality, sometimes we could take the time out to address what it really was.
Yes.
And that's just as accurate and even fair, if you would, to assess a person in that way. Because when you think about your pops, I think that what you got was what you were supposed to get, which
Yes.
was a strong work ethic,
Yes.
which was an understanding through, because whatever we don't get from the people that are around us that we love, just like what we do get, it's enough information to tell us what we should be given.
Mm.
Because if you get poor treatment and you know it's poor, then you know how to give good treatment simply because of all of what you were not given. So he was very beneficial in your upbringing, because I think it's part of the reason, based upon your experiences, you had to learn how to speak up for yourself. That's why you take the tone that you take, where the man told you no one was going to give it to you. You got to get it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So they typically tell people when they go on a boycott to have somebody else take up their cause and you stand by looking pitiful. No, not her. She gonna be at the center of that, okay? She gonna be at the center, and that's just what it is. And somebody may say, but it was wrong. It may have been, but it was her way and our way, and it's part of the upbringing where you're told, if you're gonna have something, you gotta do it yourself. You can't wait for other people to do it, and they can knock you down or whatever, but who are we not to get knocked down? So there's never reasons for us to humbly not be able to put things in perspective as it pertains to our assessment of folks. And take the time out. Now, the knee-jerk reaction is that nigga Walter wasn't shit.
Yeah.
Okay, he drank all the time, he was beating Helen. That nigga wasn't shit. Come to find out, Helen had banged him in the face first, and he was just responding. Okay, later on, but we didn't address it accurately. So, that being said, everybody got their own way of doing it, but hopefully you're being fair to yourself.
And being fair to yourself, I think that is weird. Like when you say, Mama, that's, I say it kind of like boom sometime, right? But that's being fair to me.
What?
When I say it like boom, because I don't know how else to deliver it. Like I don't, you know what I'm saying? I don't know how else to deliver my perception of it. Because somebody said, you know, could it be your lie and their truth? Well, it's my perception, as it could be their perception. You know what I'm saying? So, but then I think it actually comes down to actually what it was, and that's where shit gets tricky, where it's like, well, could your lie be their truth or their truth be your lie? Fuck all of that. Is this what happened?
But again,
You know what I'm saying?
It's still a matter of perception.
that's it.
Or how you are affected by a certain thing, maybe not necessarily perception, but how you're affected by the situation, whatever the situation is.
And those are the things that you gotta factor in, because the fact that those people are saying both sides of the situation,
It froze.
but due to the fact people speaking about how you perceive it may be different from how they perceive it, but that's true. That's absolutely true.
I was just trying to fix it there. We can shut it down and bring it back up. Okay, but I want to address that because I'm not clear about something.
Mhm.
Okay? I get perception. But now can we get actual, factual?
But it's still how you're affected.
It's still how you're affected, but it's not perception. If the actual factual is you weren't there, that's not perception. You weren't there. We can't make that up. Now perception is, well, you not being there, this is how I was affected. That's my perception of it. But
Perception is how it affects you, how you receive a situation. That's perception, not someone else's take on it. You could be there. We could be in the same room at the same time. Let's say watching a comedy show, and everything the person say might be extremely funny to you, and I sit there with a straight face. I
and
got
don't
this
get none of
yesterday.
it, right?
Yes,
But
I got
if they
this
had on blue
yesterday.
pants, they had on blue pants. That's
Okay,
actual.
but we're talking about two different things.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. If it's actual, sometimes we want to take actual and make it perception when it's actual. If someone says you were never there for me, right? That's not perception. That's actual.
Well, again, and this is why
The
we
way
had this
that they were
conversation.
there, how were they there? Did you have a roof over your head? Did you have
Someone
clothes
will
on your
say
back?
just that. And
You know?
or if the father may have given 2 gifts over the course of his life, he would say, but remember that time and remember that time. So again, the key is, and I'm glad Monique is very straightforward because it's the part that we have the conversations that, and us being straightforward, sometimes we can move without considering everybody's side of the situation.
Yeah.
And we want to be considerate of folks' side in terms of the situation because you can see the same event but perceive it differently and have all the facts actual, but the facts of the matter seem to allow your perception to be guided in this direction versus that direction. That's just the way we receive things as people. It's kind of like there was this thing on TV where people were saying it was saying laurel or some other word. And to me, I didn't hear the word laurel, but, or you can see those clothes, one was gold and the other one was a different
Blue,
color and one was blue and everybody, but it just speaks to everything comes back to you. You be true to you. So your truth and the way you handle it may be different from someone handles it because they're handling their truth in a different way than you handle your truth. But it doesn't mean what they're saying or doing is untrue if they really believe it. That's why, again, it goes back to be true to yourself. Take the time to think for yourself. Does that make sense why I'm doing it? Or am I just doing it because people think that's what I should be doing? Does that make sense?
All in the world. Okay, and I'm gonna tell you something right now. I appreciate you being here with me because I can I can be matter of fact in my explanations.
I don't think as much matter of fact as I don't think it's as much matter of fact as you have an opinion and you share it. And sometimes there's a level of consideration that may not be had, that there are other aspects to what you're saying. There's more than one way to approach it. And it works for you in certain realms, like when you're on stage, when you're doing your art and you've got an understanding of a character, boom. But in everyday life, we're running into so many different characters, so many different things that sometimes we've got to consider both sides of it because it goes back to the name of the first podcast that we had, finding a way to be unoffended. And when we ask for understanding versus being so interested in being understood, it better serves us because we can understand better when we're not understood.
That's why these are my therapy sessions because it helps me through. And it helps me, y'all, to stay in reality and not fantasy. Because there was a time that I played in fantasy. There was a time, I remember doing a intimate portrait with Lifetime years ago. And I was so excited they were interested in wanting to do an intimate portrait with me. They wanted to interview my family. And I couldn't say, well, my father drinks a lot and my brother is a molester. And so I painted this picture of what I wanted my family to be. I didn't lie because I did say my brother taught me how to fight. He did. I just didn't say I had to fight that nigga, but he did teach me how to fight, right? I just didn't finish it off.
Perception.
Come on now. I did say that my father told me that didn't nobody owe me nothing, but I didn't say he probably had about 3 drinks before he told me that.
3,
Okay, Daddy.
4. Okay.
All right.
Don't be funny now.
So for a long time, y'all, I lived in fantasy. And in living in fantasy, there were friendships that were created that really weren't friendships because I lived in fantasy. There were relationships that were created that really weren't relationships because I live in fantasy. I have a biological sister named Millicent. And Millicent and I have never, ever had a relationship. Ever. That's why I have to say my biological sister because I didn't select her and she didn't select me. We just happen to have the same mother and father. But we've never had a relationship. And when I got to Hollywood, I took myself to fantasy. And I painted this picture of me and my older sister having this amazing relationship and she and her family moved out and I wanted to live in the fantasy, but the reality kept showing up saying, you know what this really is. Y'all know what this really is. And to this day, we still don't have a relationship, but it's not like it's anything new. It's never been. But I lived in the fantasy of it. With my brother Gerald, the one who was the molester. I lived in the fantasy of it. I remember this nigga going with us to the Black Oscars. Walked in, suited down, booted down, and I'm so goddamn uneasy, but what? What I'm gonna do? This is my family. We at the Black Oscars. We gotta show up. We gotta, what? That's when my sister found out, bitch, you don't call Lisa Ray Lisa. Her goddamn name is Lisa Ray. She said, hello, Lisa. She said, Lisa Ray. Well, bitch, okay, then. Now, respect. But there was a lot of fantasy going on for what I wanted it to be, for what I wanted the perception to be. And that's the same way I feel about death. Oftentimes we go in fantasy and we want to paint a picture of what we wanted it to be or what we want people to think it was because of we might be embarrassed or ashamed or whatever that is. But y'all, that's the shit that keeps us in prison. That's the shit that makes us sick. That's the shit that keeps us balled up and balled over and we can't get out of our beds because we know we telling a lie. And we keep dealing with this lie and unafraid to say anything out loud. And lo and behold, now they done died. So now I really can't say this shit out loud because now I'm just going to be like, oh, you disrespecting the dead and they can't speak for themselves. So just for me, what is a part of my healing and a part of helping me, I had to start living in the reality of what shit really was, of what it really was. So when it came down to my mother's death, and I remember Sid and I having these conversations and he kept saying, Mama, you sure you're going to be good because that is your mother? Are you sure you're going to be okay? And if you need to go see her, if you need whatever you need to do, I'm right here. You're going to be okay. And I said to him, I said, you know what, Daddy? I mourned my mother in life. So there's no need for me to go through all of that now, that final finality. Is that a word?
Finality.
Ow! Damn, baby.
But final and finality mean the same thing.
There it is. It's it. But because while she was alive, I was going through that mourning period. Because I was mourning the breakup of that relationship and of that, I don't even know to call it a friendship, but I was mourning that period. So when the time actually came, there was no more mourning to be done.
Let me ask you.
Yes, sir.
Was it a mourning due to the breakup of the relationship, or was it a mourning due to the realization of what the relationship was when you assessed it?
Oh, Daddy, that's not fair. I think both. I think it was both. I think because once I assessed the relationship and once I played things back and once I really understood who she was as a woman, not as my mother, but as a woman, that was hurtful. Once I understood the process and the almost like the strategy, once I understood what was happening in the dynamic of my family, that was hurtful. So I mourned that part. I mourned that part of, oh my God, you wasn't who I thought you were. But then all along she was telling me who she was. But when you are a kid and even an adult, your mother, for me, my mother was still in some ways my superhero. I didn't want to see the flaws. I didn't want to believe the lies. I didn't want to see the manipulation. I didn't want to see the greed. I didn't want to see the sickness. I didn't want to see it for a long time. And then when I had to start seeing it, it was like that was mourning for me. That was a rough time. You were there. That was a rough time for me because it was like, well, shit, that and now that and until I had to get to a point of that let go, where I couldn't hold her hostage anymore. Because I was holding my mother hostage, y'all. I really was, for some of my feelings and how I was responding and reacting. And I couldn't hold that woman hostage no more because I had to realize I was a grown ass woman myself with my own family, the one that I asked for and the one that I created. So I had to let her go. But in me letting go, I had to let go. As if my mother had already gone to her next journey. So, for me at this point, there's lessons learned. I've learned some awesome lessons. And one of the biggest lessons, and even on me and Robin's walks, and we'll say lesson learned, what I don't want, what I do not want, is when that time comes for me, if my children or my husband should outlive me, I don't want them there out of obligation. I would want them there out of honor. I wouldn't want y'all to feel like we gotta do this, instead of feeling like that was our girl, and let's pound her out. We see you on the next ride, where it's an honor to say goodbye.
Well, I think part of that is being conscious of your relationship with your parents. And there are things that you can't do when you're unconscious of, in certain circumstances, like if you're not aware that you should be more engaged with your children, if you're not aware and you're not cognizant of the fact and you don't deem it important that when there's a rift between your children, to at a point you may have to come in and be a mediator and invoke a level of impartial knowledge on them so they can be able to see the difference between right and wrong, because you've already built that foundation so that when you take them back to the foundation, they are already able to grasp. You're not recreating the wheel for them. So there would be no question that they would be honored, because they would be able to assess not only what you had given to them from a standpoint of the conversations, but what you were trying to do in the world, and then in the conversations that you had, you backed it up with action. So you're engaged in a different way than your parents were, and that's why there's a level of, though you might not necessarily show up in funerals, there's a respect that you have had, and I say this for the listeners, that you might not get from the way she's communicating regarding her mom and regarding her dad. There's a level of respect in high order that you had given to them in life, so that there was a feeling that there was nothing left to give in death, because they couldn't benefit from that anyway. So when you've really done everything that you could possibly do for a person, sometimes those who are judging you for you not being there at the end, they were the reason why was they didn't see you when life was happening, when you were around. Just like you didn't see them. They showed up at the end. And when you really understand people, you try not to let that offend you, because you understand this is how people can be. And if you want to find a way to get pissed off, try to understand folks who are not making any sense. That will piss you off. Because you're trying to understand, how come they're talking to me as if this shit makes sense, but it makes no sense. Well, it's because we live in a world where people feel like they don't have to make sense. They just tell you what they feel, if that makes sense to them.
Y'all, listen. We talked about it today. Life and death, the reality and the fantasy. And I needed to share it today because, it's my session. And what I don't want to ever do again is play in fantasy because it can make you sick. And playing in fantasy got me to over 300 pounds. And playing in fantasy allowed my family, the one that I was born into, to be so separated and so divided and unwilling to be truthful. And that's what happens when we play in fantasy.
Now, be clear, we don't wanna make it seem like there's never a good time to play in fantasy, because
Oh
she
yeah.
could be the meter maid, and she wrote me a ticket. Now I gotta figure out a way how to talk her out of giving me that ticket,
And-
okay? And that's called playing in fantasy, but that's some different shit that we talking about, okay? That's some different shit.
I like it.
Baby, you gonna take us home?
We're gonna take us home and you know, we wanna thank y'all. And I know y'all were trying to call in, but we didn't have the lines open today because we really wanted to have this conversation all the way through because I needed it. And
I didn't know that the lines weren't even open.
yeah,
but-
Daddy, I didn't plug it up because they had started ringing before we even started the show. Okay, so I don't want you to think wasn't nobody calling.
Hey, look, after the fact.
I know my sweetness.
That's all right.
I know. But okay, so this is what I just wanna say.
Okay.
Treat the people in life that you love good. Because you know one day that's going to be the last day.
That you'll see them, but it ain't gonna be the last day.
I know, baby.
That's what's up.
We done rode this ride a whole lot together, haven't we?
I don't know, but nigga, we riding this one like a motherfucker.
But I
ain't
think we done rode before.
It's a good chance. I believe it.
I think we done rode
That's a good
before.
chance.
Yeah, we done rode before. Because who won't understand me?
I don't know.
Okay?
Okay, Robin understand you.
Yes, you do.
Yes, you.
Well, I rode the ride with her before too. We talked about it.
That's right. That's
Mhm.
right.
I was Harriet Tubman. And she was the little light gal that hung with her.
Okay.
Come and let them see you so they know what I'm talking about. Come on, if y'all ever
Say-
go,
They know what I look like.
if y'all
Come on
ever go
over.
to Harriet Tubman's
And
house,
for the record, I'd like to say,
say
Don't say it over
I'm
there.
having a whole funeral with an open couch,
Yes.
pretty shoes on.
Mhm.
She gonna be there. I don't know all this stuff she talking about.
Yeah.
She gonna be there. Sydney gonna be there helping her, cause we gonna be old. I'm gonna be old and decrepit. They gonna have to fix my hands a certain way and everything.
Yes.
But I'm going to have on my pretty shoes. It's gonna be a full couch.
Yes.
She gonna be there.
There
Yes.
it is.
Yes. And since she came in with it, we've already discussed it. And the only
We have talked about
the
it.
only people that's gonna be there is me, her, and Sidney. Okay? And we're gonna lay her ass on the couch and put pretty shoes on her. And then after that, and then we're gonna cremate her.
What?
Yeah, she told me also, she said, all you gotta do is give me a full couch with my pretty shoes. After that, do what you want.
And there it is.
We want to thank each and every one of y'all for listening to us today. Every ear, every mind, every heart, baby. Because y'all could have been doing anything else. So we want to thank y'all. And, you know, like my daddy always says, the mind is like a parachute.
It's no good unless it's open.
We love y'all.
For free.
Give it to me. Bye, my babies.